a huge shift can happen in our lives when we just pay attention to that intuition and that internal sense within us that says, I think it's time. And in order to meet it when it arrives, you need to have that space within you. Hello and welcome back to Remember Why You're Here, a podcast for seekers and sensitives where you can relax, receive, reconnect to your own self, and remember the most important thing of all, why you're here. I'm Asia Suler, author, earth intuitive, teacher, and former owner of One Willow Apothecaries. And in this episode today, I'm going to talk about something that is super personal for me right now and is really, really dear to my heart. And it is this concept of moving on from something because it no longer fits. Or moving on from something not because it's wrong or bad or toxic, but just because it's time to let go. And the reason why this is so personal for me right now, and I feel so passionate about it, is that this is my official announcement that I will not be restarting my apothecary, at least at this point in time. So just a little bit of backstory, and this is why I said I was the former owner or founder of One Willow Apothecaries. So if you're new to me or this podcast, then you might not know that for 12 years, I had an apothecary called One Willow Apothecaries. And this was a huge part of my life path and my journey. This is how my entrepreneurial journey started. It's how my business started. I used to be called One Willow Apothecaries as my business. And it really began once I graduated herbal school. I had a very strong directive to start this herbal apothecary. And so it began with tincture formulas, and it began with tea blends and smoking blends and salves. And I had this beautiful array of things. And I started doing flower essences right from the beginning too. And the apothecary really evolved with me over time. So again, I started with this like big product line. And then over time, I realized what I was most passionate about was really these more vibrational formulas. And so then I had stone and flower essence pairing formulas. And eventually I just had my flower essence line, which I really expanded out. And I had flower essences that corresponded with my classes and the things that I taught. And it was just this really beautiful operation and endeavor, and like just such a huge heartfelt part of my journey. And about 10 years ago, I actually opened my apothecary in a physical location on a place called Marshall High Studios in Marshall, North Carolina, where I live. So I had the apothecary in this place, which was the old high school here in the county. And it was just such a delightful chapter of my life. This is where I started seeing clients. This is where I first started teaching in-person classes, and it housed the apothecary as well. So this is where I welcomed in my first apprentices and eventually my first employees. And we shipped medicine around the world. It was, just incredibly special in a way that I will prize and cherish forever. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know what could ever convince me to give this up, even though from where I am now, this wouldn't necessarily be an endeavor I would start at this point in my life. But the fact that I had it, had built it, that had meant so much to me over the years, that now we were sharing flower essences with people all over the world. I remember thinking, I don't know what could ever convince me to give this up. And then last fall, Hurricane Helene hit us here in the mountains. And if you haven't been along for the ride here at all, this might be news to you. And if you have, then bear with me. You know this story. But Hurricane Helene came in and we had massive flooding in the town where I live and the town where my apothecary was. People are calling it a 1,000-year flood. I've heard some other people say it's more like a 30,000-year flood. But the waters rose, and it rose to about 9 feet inside of my apothecary. And so suddenly, overnight, the apothecary and everything I had built there in the last 12 years was just gone. And at the time, I thought, okay, well, maybe I can rescue some of these medicines. Like, maybe I could resurrect this. But I realized once I oriented to just the reality of a kind of flood like that, where literally like everything is taken down and buried in toxic muck, that you don't really rescue anything from that unless it's something like a stone or something that can be washed in that way. And so I realized pretty quickly that everything that was physically there was done. And I had this moment of really sitting with the question of, do I start again? Like, do I start over? Do I start One Willow Apothecaries over? And, at this point, One Willow has made so many connections with so many people and all the far-flung corners of the globe. And yet when I really sat with it, what came to me, the answer that came to me was no. And it's something that I've just been like holding very preciously to my heart since this event last fall. And something now I really feel passionate about speaking to and talking about. And yes, making this very public announcement that I will not be starting the apothecary again. At least that's what I'm feeling right now. And that's what I'm moving forward with. And I know a lot of people have asked me about it. And so this is my first time saying this in a public way. And I want to talk about why. Because I think that this is such an important update, not just for me. Obviously, this is a huge moment in my life, but for anyone who is at a really big crossroads in their life right now. Because there's this thing where we often think in order to like let something go, it has to be in some way bad or toxic or really draining for us, when actually there's this really profound update where it doesn't have to be wrong in order for it to be done. And I know you've probably felt this at some point in your life too, and that is what this episode is about, what to do when it no longer fits. And why I use this phrase is because I like to think about this in terms of the clothes in our closet. So you might have a piece of clothing that you absolutely loved for a chapter of your life. You wore it every single day. People knew, oh, that's Asia's outfit. Like that's her signature look. And you prized it. You cherished it. And yet you go to your closet, you get invited to a clothing swap, whatever. You're doing a spring cleaning. You go to your closet and you try it on and it just doesn't fit anymore. And this might be that like very physically, literally that you cannot get that piece of clothing on over your body anymore. Or it might just mean that you put it on and you look in the mirror and you're like, interesting. This just doesn't fit me in the way it used to. Like it doesn't fit my essence, my energy, my personality, where I'm moving in life. And what I have found is that we often wait for things to get to the point where they are so draining, so dramatic, so toxic before we make big changes and let big things go. And it's a really powerful update to decide to let something go out of love and deep respect for that chapter of your life, to let something go, not because it's wrong, because you're ready. And the way I think about it too, with this metaphor of our literal clothes in our closet is, I have a small closet space. And if this piece is taking up space in my closet, even if I still love it, even if I think maybe I might want to wear it again from time to time in the future, or I don't know, maybe I'll just keep it just in case, that is taking the space of something that I would love now, that would really fit me now, that would be giving me energy for the next part of my evolution. And I think that term evolution here is important, and it's really sparking this awareness for me that one way that we know that we are evolving in life is that we're able to make decisions to directionally guide ourselves without it having to get to the point where it is totally untenable, where we are navigating the waters of our life and choosing new paths based on the subtle inner directives that are speaking to us and that are guiding us. We're able to tune into this more subtle stream of our intuition and take that leap to trust it. I think this is a huge sign of our evolution. And I have noticed that our intuition will speak in louder and louder tones until the message is received, which feels very annoying sometimes, but is also such a blessing because, and I know I've said this before, but because the message we need will never stop being sent. It's a blessing. And so the same is true with intuition. Our intuition will send us messages of how to move, when to move, what our next direction is, and it will be subtle and subtle and subtle until it's not. So here's an example of intuition getting louder and louder until you listen. And it's an example from my own life, probably from back in the day when I started the apothecary. And it's one I use often because it's just so like gloriously obvious. So I was once camping with some friends, and this was right when I had first moved down here to the mountains and had fallen in love with this place and, had learned skills like how to camp and how to tend a fire. And we were camping and I was like the fire tender for the night, and I like felt really important. These were like friends from back up north who were visiting me, and I was tending the fire, and it was like the end of the night. And I remember thinking, as I stood up to get the hatchet to cut a little more firewood, I remember thinking to myself, there was this subtle wave that came over me and thought, like, I don't think we need it anymore. I think we're good. I think that we're done. We can let this flow out. And I didn't listen. And I remember I went to go pick up the hatchet, and the handle of the hatchet had gotten pushed close enough to the fire, to the embers, that it was starting to get charred on one end. And I picked it up and dropped it immediately, like, ow, because it had gotten charred in that one spot. So the message got a little louder, right? Did I listen? Unfortunately not, because I was still learning. So I put out the charred bit, and then I went to go chop what was going to be the last piece of wood on the fire, and I slipped, and I ended up hitting myself with the blade. And I am fine. It turned out completely fine. It was a very painful injury, but all told, I was okay. But it took that to that point for me to listen to my intuition, and my intuition also that was like helping me orient to like, hey, you don't need to prove anything here. Like, just have fun. And so this is one example, right? And I like to use it because it's a little bit humorous, but this is what happens in our lives often, right? That we ignore the subtle pieces inside of ourselves, the subtle messages that say, I think it might be time to move on, or I think it might be time to let go. We ignore that, and so the message has to get louder and louder and louder, but a huge shift can happen in our lives when we just pay attention to that intuition and that internal sense within us that says, I think it's time. And even though this event of this hurricane was so dramatic in our mountains, there's this way in which me choosing to not restart the apothecary still feels like a very subtle choice. And the call still feels subtle in that I had never gotten to that point with the apothecary. I felt like, oh, this is untenable, or like, oh, I don't want this anymore, or this is draining me. Not at all, right? It was still something I loved. And yet in the aftermath of this experience, every time I kept reaching for this sense of the blueprint of the future, of the way forward, the apothecary wasn't a part of it. And so it's been this very beautiful and at times emotional experience of letting go. But here's the thing that I find to be so powerful about this. If we can learn how to navigate our lives based on those subtle messages, if we can learn to let go of what no longer fits before it becomes something that is harmful for us, we start to create this life that is built on this foundation, this legacy of a kind of spiritual elegance, this elegance of really trusting what we know, trusting the subtle hints of where to move. And that elegance, I find, just seems to spread out into everything else in your life and to support you as you move into the next era of your incarnation. This is not about whether something is like beautiful or good in your life. Something can be beautiful and good and still no longer be attuned to where you're at, and most importantly, where your spirit is asking you to go. So how do you know when it's time to move on? And, I say this at the same time that I recognize that I had a, very clear event that was giving me this choice point. There's been other choice points in my life that were not nearly as clear, but the signs are always there. So how do you know when it's time for you to move on from something? Well, the first thing to attune to is no longer feeling that sense of movement forward. Like, think about something in your life that you were really excited about when you started. And perhaps for this exercise, use something that you've already closed the chapter on, not something that you're still sort of in flux about, but something you've closed the chapter on. Now think back to when you first began it. Like, think back to that sense of like excitement, momentum, movement forward. When we are meant to be putting our energy into something, we're going to feel that sense of movement and energy moving us forward. And when it's time for something to draw to a close, that momentum, that energy is going to start to slow down. And specifically, if you don't feel that movement, right, it also probably means you're not moved by it anymore in the same way that you used to be. That it used to be this creative force in your life that was moving you, was moving the dial ahead, was moving your own evolution and self-concept. And when you don't feel that movement anymore within that thing, then it's time to let go. We are meant to engage with people and things that are supporting us in our evolution, that are helping us to get to the next phase in our evolution, to co-create with us where we're at that moment in time. And there's such a fallacy in our culture. There's such an attachment to this idea that something is only truly a success if it's lifelong. So, a business, for example, a relationship, that it's only successful if, it lasted forever. And it's such a silly way to think about success. That's not my measure of success. And I don't think it's the way success is truly experienced on a spiritual level on our planet. Success means that you stepped in fully and that you grew and evolved through the experience, that you grew and evolved as much as you possibly could through that experience. So much so that there's almost not a charge anymore around the idea of letting it go. And if you're still in process right now with this, you might still feel a charge, and that's totally okay. But it's almost this sense of the charge that was connected to your learning within this is starting to dissolve. And I really think this goes along with the concept too, that we think the purpose of life is happiness, and it's not. The purpose of life is aliveness. It's to be alive. And so while I found still like so much contentment and like happiness and joy through the apothecary, was running the apothecary, rebuilding this huge thing, something that would take me a whole year at least of my life to rebuild, would that bring me alive? And this is such an important question, right? Because it almost drains some of the value judgment out of it, that it's not about it being good or bad or right or wrong. It's just, is this the thing that's going to bring me alive? And in this way, we can really navigate our life to understand that we're not even being asked to know exactly why we're choosing the things we're choosing or how that's going to turn out. We just need to trust that sense of aliveness that is pulling us forward and that is sometimes asking us to make choices. And a really good question here that can help you with this and help you make one of those decisions is, if no one knew or cared about this thing, would you still do it? And this can even apply to relationships. If the person you're in relationship with didn't care whether or not you left that relationship, would you still be in it? And this can be a really fascinating way to reframe it. And so I think about this with the apothecary, and I still love making flower essences and taking flower essences and being able to give flower essences to my friends. But if I really ask myself, if no one knew or cared whether I stepped back into production, which is what having a, brick and mortar physical goods business is. It's a lot about production. Would I produce again? And that answer was no. And so I'm curious, as you're listening, and as maybe scenarios or connections or endeavors, projects, people are coming up in your mind, to ask yourself, if the outcome was going to be fine either way, if people were not attached to this, what would I decide? And that can be a really good indicator of where your heart is leading you right now. Another sign that you have outgrown something in your life, another one of these subtle signs, is that there's a slight discomfort to it. And it reminds me again of putting on that piece of clothing that you've outgrown. It's not bad. You're not I hate this thing, or, this is so itchy, I'm going to jump out of my skin. But it's just there's something slightly uncomfortable about it. Maybe it's rubbing your body in a way that doesn't feel great, or you look in the mirror and it's just something about the way that piece of clothing is cut just doesn't match your style, doesn't match your identity. And this can be really helpful if you are in the practice of tuning into your body, tuning into your soma, tuning into and tracking how you're feeling in your body. Because often when something is not right anymore, I keep thinking about that Whitney Houston line, it's not right, but it's okay. If it's not right anymore, there's going to be this slight sense of incongruency and discomfort. And that is an important thing to tune into, because what's uncomfortable about it is that it's not matching you in the person that you are growing into now. It is not matching you in your unfurling, the deepest unfurling of who you are right now. It's not a resonance anymore. And that's why there's a slight discomfort. If we are taking on and internalizing any pieces that are not us, our bodies and spirits are going to have a reaction to that. So it may not be something as dramatic as a flu, where your body's spiking a high fever and saying, oh, this is not me, get it out, right? That's not the kind of drama we're talking about. We're talking about the kind of discomfort of feeling like something's just a little too tight, something's a little too loose, something's a little too scratchy. And so really noticing and tracking inside of your body, how do I feel? Not just inside this thing right now, but how do I feel about the idea of continuing to be in this project, connection, relationship, basically having this chapter continue, or in my case, really expending the profound energy that it would take to restart and rework this chapter of my life. And then finally, the last sort of hint that, something might be done in your life, that you're ready to move on, is just this sense of the river flowing in a new direction. And this is logistically, very literally true, that when we are meant to move towards something in our life, there will be an energy flow that is already starting. I almost get the sense of in the visual I have is it's flowing from behind us, through us, into the future. And there is a distinct energy flow that is here to guide us leading into what is we're meant to to step into next. And so a lot of this ability to attune to the subtle, your subtle knows, these subtle decisions, is being able to recognize when the river is just flowing in another direction. And I remember this is something I said to a sweetie of mine when I was ending our relationship, ending that incarnation of our relationship, as I said, it's not like anything is wrong or bad. I can just sense the river is flowing. And the longer I resist the current, the more tired and the more drained I feel. And so that's also an indicator, right? When you resist to the current, you will slowly get more and more tired and feel more and more drained. And so sometimes it's just about letting go into that current of energy that is ready to move you into the new place. And that can be scary because sometimes we really don't know what that looks like. We really do not know what that next chapter is going to entail. But you can feel the sense of the river flowing, and through tuning into your inner awareness that the river is not flowing in the direction of that which you are still holding on to right now. And I want you to know that it's okay to have a lot of complicated set of feelings around this. It might not just be letting go into the river and experiencing bliss. Likely you will experience grief. There is a real grief in letting go of something that's been a really beautiful part of our life, even when it's time for it to return to the earth. And so know that it's okay if there's a complicated mix of feelings come up, and also underneath all those feelings, you will probably notice a sense of relief. That letting go feels like a sense of relief, of being carried by this current into whatever it is that's supposed to come next. We don't expect flowers to bloom forever. I don't expect the poppies blooming in my garden right now to even be the same or be there tomorrow. And yet, I don't think they're any less important or worthy because of that. And the same is true for these chapters in our lives. Flowers, when they are complete, when they've given the gift that they are meant to bring to this world, when they get pollinated and they create seeds, the way that they bring those seeds back to the earth is by letting go, letting the flower go so that the seeds can come forth and plant a new era. And I really like this visual of literally letting go of a flower. It's like you loved that flower. That flower was so important to you. It was so beautiful. And there can be a ritual here in letting go. So I'm curious, what is coming up for you as you're listening to this podcast? What people or situations or projects or endeavors, what places where you're putting your energy came to mind as I've been talking? We always know. A part of us always knows what is complete and what is ready to see this ritual of completion take place. So I'm curious, what is coming up? Really notice this, because that is a message for you. You already know this, and this is just making it that much clearer for you. And the reason why that situation, endeavor, person, project came up is because it is taking a space in your life that is ready to be used for something else, that is ready to help propel you into your next phase and your next evolution. So I knew that I had big dreams for this year of 2025. I knew this way back in 2024. And when this event happened, and I really took stock of what it would mean, what it would take to restart the apothecary, basically build this again from the ground up, I realized that if I did that, I wouldn't be able to step into the next dreams. I wouldn't have the energy to start the podcast I wanted to start. I wouldn't have the time and the spaciousness to start the new school I wanted to create, Earth Angel School. And I wouldn't have the momentum or the creative space to work on my next book, which is my next project this year. And so in that way of thinking, when I realized that even though I loved this thing, when I realized that it would take the energetic place and the literal physical place of my time and energy of these other things that I wanted to do, the decision was clear. And so to know this too, that if something is coming to you and is feeling like it's ready to be done, it's ready to be released and let go, not because it's bad or terrible, but just because it doesn't fit anymore, then know that that's because your spirit is saying there's space for something else that's coming, and that something else is coming. That sense of its arrival is part of what is moving you and initiating you to even think about this, to even want to make this decision. And in order to meet it when it arrives, you need to have that space within you. So know that it's actually not just about letting something go. It's about creating the space for the newness, for the next chapter, your next evolution to come in. So I really encourage you, thinking again about these flowers, I really encourage you, if something is coming up for you, as I've been talking, as you've been listening today, really pay attention, take note of that. And once you get clear on whether or not it's the right time for you to let go, I really encourage you to create some sort of ritual to mark the letting go of this thing. And there's going to be physical actions you have to take, conversations you have to have, websites you need to take down, whatever it is. Like there's going to be those things, of course, but we always initiate these things on an energetic level first. And having the ritualistic or the energetic container can really hold you as you continue to make this clarifying decision and take the steps that you need to create this space in your life. And I particularly love to work with flowers in this kind of ritual. On the other side of losing the apothecary in Hurricane Helene, it was a long process of cleanup, of literally having these medicines go back to the earth. And, once we were at a place where things were a little more stable in the building and on the grounds, I went with my wonderful assistant, Alali, who's now the administrator of the schools that I run and is behind the scenes doing all kinds of amazing things in my business. She flew in and we did a ritual on the island where the apothecary was, where she had worked for years and years inside the apothecary. And we brought flowers and we made a mandala right on the shoreline where the water normally meets the island. And it was such a powerful movement to ritualistically let go, because even sometimes when we take those physical movements, a part of our energy is still connected. And so I really encourage you to design some sort of ritual for yourself. Maybe you want to work with flowers too, put them in the water, put the petals in the water and watch them go. Or maybe something else is going to be calling you. But design some sort of ritual that is marking this change in your life, that is marking this transition that you have chosen for yourself based on your subtle intuitive knowing, based on this guidance at the heart of you. So all of this is true, that you are ready to move on, that you're ready to embrace like the next beautiful chapter by letting go of this thing that just no longer fits. And as you're doing this, you might feel what I call the pang. The pang is that out of the blue feeling, almost like a cramp around your heart, that comes with the grief of letting go. And the pang can take other forms too. The pang can feel like worry. The pang can feel like fear. But the pang isn't a sign that you're on the wrong path. It's actually just a natural part of this process that you're in. We don't grieve things and people that we didn't love. And so grieving for something being over is a sign that you loved it, that it was an important part of your life. And so when the pang comes, because it will come, just know that it will come in waves. I still have pangs, even though I made this decision now, 8 months ago. I still have pangs that come up from time to time. When I see a flower blooming or I find one rogue essence bottle I still have here at my house, I have a pang that arrives where I think, oh, I miss this thing. And I can hold both at the same time, that I miss this thing because I miss that chapter of my life and all the beauty it held. And at the same time, I hold the reality that that whole chapter isn't gone. It's inside of me. It's become integrated in who I am. And it's actually supporting me into stepping into this next phase of my life because of everything that I learned about myself through that experience, through that chapter in my life. So one way I love to work with this is an exercise that I call breathing and feeling. And this is literally just breathing in, and on the exhale, naming that feeling that you're feeling. This is also really helpful to bring you into a interoceptive state, to really be paying attention to your inner landscape. And oftentimes our emotions, they just want to be felt. That's it. They're not asking for anything else of us. They don't want you to go back into the past or to change your mind. They just want to be felt. And so you breathe in, and on the exhale, say out loud whatever that feeling is. Maybe it's sadness, maybe it's grief, maybe it's fear, maybe it's worry. Whatever it is, just say it out loud and, repeat it for as many times as you need to. So do this exercise for maybe 30 to 60 seconds, breathing in, breathing out, saying, grief, 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 grief. And keep doing this for about around that time, about a minute, and then notice if the feeling has shifted at all. So maybe you notice again on the next breath, you're like, worry. Now I'm feeling worry. And that's a little bit of a different flavor than grief. And so you keep working with this. And normally I do this for maybe 3 minutes. This is a short exercise. And I notice that just for having named it out loud, I feel so much different at the end of it. And so this is a really beautiful way to work with the emotions that come up, to feel them so they can be released. This is charge and energy that just wants to be released. It's not asking you to do anything different. It's just asking to be felt. And if this pang feels like it has a really big presence in your life, or it keeps coming up, another way to work with this is to ask that pang to speak. So you could even do the same exercise where you breathe in and you breathe out and you're naming the emotion, and then transition into breathing in, and as you breathe out, speaking out loud as that pang. And so you might say something like, I'm afraid that, or I'm sad that, and just let this pang inside of you have a voice for a minute. It's okay to breathe in and breathe out and say, I miss. Maybe part of you misses some aspect of this, and that's fine. Say, I miss this. This is what I miss. This is specifically what I miss about this. And once you feel like you've spoken enough of these, you can ask that pang, come into conversation with that feeling inside of you, and ask the pang, what is it that you need? Because oftentimes when the pang is up, when we're feeling these feelings, when we're afraid or we're grieving or we miss something, there's an unmet need in that moment. And it might just be, I need to be felt. I just need you to feel me. That's all. Or it might be, I need a ritual to mark this ending of this chapter and the beginning of another one. Or, I miss being outside every week making essences as these flowers are blooming. I miss this. Can we still do this even though we're not, bottling thousands of bottles and sending them around the world? And I can say to that pang, yes, we can. I can also say to that pang, hey, we're not doing this now, but never say never. It's possible we might do it again. And sometimes that can also be very helpful for the pang, especially when we're talking about things that we're letting go, not because they're toxic, but because they're just not right anymore. And then lastly, one way I love to work with that pang when it comes out is to call in the tug to meet it. So these are the two forces that I see at play when we are really being asked to let go of a chapter and move on. On the one side, we have the tug. That is the thing that we're moving towards, the momentum, the movement. And then on the other side, we have the pang, that thing that is still helping us process the past, helping us process what we're letting go. And so sometimes when I have the pang come up, I'll ask for the presence of the tug. And this might look like a particular thing. Maybe it's a vision of where I want to be in the future. Maybe it's visualized as a being, a guide, a color. Let it be authentic to you, but really call in that tug, the thing that's moving you forward, the exciting spaciousness, that possibility. And literally that spaciousness can hold space for the pang. Like, I know you're sad and I know you miss this, but look at and feel right now the spaciousness that I actually have to hold you, that is grounded in my excitement for and the energy and momentum that is building in anticipation of this really bright new chapter in my life. Taking a moment to really sense all the energy that's going to be on the other side of this decision can be so helpful, because ultimately that's why you're being called to make this change. And this is what we're asked to do when it no longer fits, to let go so we can step into the spaciousness of our own becoming. And the more you start to call that feeling into your life now, the more you will be able to access the clarity and the strength and the perspective that you need to make the changes that you need to make in order to really meet what is coming, to meet what is waiting for you, to meet your own unfolding evolution. So you will evolve so many times in this lifetime. You will live so many lifetimes inside of this lifetime. And so much can happen when we let go of that tight grip of holding on to what was, if we allow ourselves to move with the current of the river of what we're becoming. We then get to evolve in this way, to touch these unfolding aspects of ourselves, to continually surprise ourselves. So there was this quote that I wrote on the chalkboard in the room of my apothecary. And I wrote this quote on the chalkboard when I first moved in 10 years ago. And I thought to myself, oh, I'll change this quote. I'll change it a lot. I'll change it however I'm feeling that day. I never changed it. Not once. And this quote by the Irish poet John O'Donoghue went like this: "Live like the river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding." I had no idea when I wrote that quote on the wall of my apothecary just how much it would mean to me. I had no idea how much it would foretell the unfolding of my life, but I have thought about it so many times since. As the waters came in and wiped the slate of that chalkboard clear, I thought about how this is the ultimate way for me to acknowledge the beauty and the life force of this thing that I created, is to continue to live like a river, to be carried by the surprise of my unfolding. And I invite you to step into that river too, to let yourself be surprised by your own unfolding, and to let yourself be carried into this next phase of your life. So thank you so much for being here, for listening, for being a part of this new chapter in my life. The start of this podcast has been such a profound new unfolding for me, and I'm just so honored to be in this space with you. So thank you for being here, and know that I am here really rooting for you and for this change that is happening in your life, because you know when it's time. And you know that so much is waiting for you on the other side. So if this is resonating with you, I'd love to hear from you. I have a voice message mailbox over on my website at asiasuler.com/remember. And if this is striking a chord with you, I'd love to hear the story of your river and where it's carrying you. And if this podcast is speaking to you, if this feels like a supportive place, a restful place, then I would love it if you gave this podcast a rating, a thumbs up, or a review. These just mean so much to me, and they're energy that carries me forward in my own unfolding. So until next time, may the river carry us all. May we arrive on that other side intact, connected, excited, alive, and back in touch with the most important thing of all, that remembrance of why we're here.